Hi, everyone. Carol and Giovanni and I are here today to talk about our session. And this is different from what we'd planned. So let me just sort of go back. All of you brilliant teachers who volunteered your time and your expertise back in November 2019, we were going to do this, and we all agreed to have this amazing panel where we would share our expertise about total literacies and how we scaffold literature to help students with their skills and their sense of empathy and their sense of inquiry and all of that. Well, COVID-19 curtailed all of that. And so this is not a joyous time. Those of you know that who are on the panel, I sent you a note saying I totally understand the cost was prohibitive. The COVID pandemic is prohibitive. What's happening in some of your schools, you're doing remote, but you're doing in person. You're not doing, all of this is prohibitive, and you add on top of that community and family. So Carol and I and John got together and we thought we would try to condense the idea of what we wanted to do in November and still do honor to all of you brilliant panelists who are unable to be with us on this particular session. And we hope we do it right for you, and we respect you, and we're so hopeful that you and your family stay safe. So here's the rundown. Carol and I are going to take the same 4 questions that I sent to you last winter, and we're going to have a conversation. Just an easygoing conversation. As you can see, we're sort of dressed comfortably, and it's all just, we're just going to talk. And we hope that what we talk about and explore will be helpful to you. So let's get busy. The first question that the panel responded to was, given our Gen Z audience, identify and explain 3 traits you have observed regarding how your students interact and wrestle with texts. Carol will go first, and then I'll respond too.
You know, it's Jocelyn, it's very hard not to think in terms of the particular changes we've all seen in student behavior and response as readers since March, since schools closed or they went virtual. And one of the things that I'm seeing and hearing from the teachers that I work with has to do with students' ability to focus. And what this sent me on a journey to do is really to do some research in terms of the effect of anxiety on one's ability to, one, have stamina to read, but 2, simply to pay attention to what's on the page. And what I learned was that one of the effects that anxiety has, we don't have enough memory, like that random access memory that our computers run out of. The same thing is happening in our students' brains. As they're worrying about all these other things, it makes it harder and harder to attend to a piece of text. And this includes, how can you respond to a text if you can't even remember what you read 1 minute ago?
Right.
I think that this is something that all of us are struggling with right now during the pandemic. Are you seeing it for yourself in terms of reading?
Yeah, just personally, that's a great question back. With our projects, I find that if I'm not in the right space and have told my brain that I am going to work and maintain that space, that everything else around me will start creeping in. So I have to actually go to a physical space where I am now and shut it all off. No.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you just said about creeping in. The psychologist William James talks. He uses the metaphor of a spotlight.
That's right.
For our attention, and so, but that spotlight is not entirely under our voluntary control, which is a good thing. Because when a lion is coming at you or something, you want to be able to get out of your spotlight and deal with the fight or flight survival methods. But what's happening now is that our attention is scattered all around us. As we're worrying about health, we're worrying about politics, we're worrying about when things are being delivered. I mean, just so many other distractions. And I mean, where my greatest concern lies is how are we going to make sure that reading doesn't get lost in all of this? Because I believe that reading is an enormous comfort to individuals.
I agree with you, and I'm really worried about this
What do
particular.
you think? I mean, in terms of
I think that with this generation, especially, I mean, they feel so hard, not much, but they feel hard. I mean, they think and they're taking it all in, and they've been so tried. I mean, before COVID even came around, they were just, this is a very sober generation, and they take everything so seriously. They're not like the students that I used to teach. So now, even with, I'm seeing this with elementary students and with middle school students and with high school students. It's just they stay in almost like a perpetual worry state. And so to get, as you say, to get them then to read,
Mhm.
there has to be an investment. So I think for me, when I'm working with students,
Yeah.
I have to try and figure out how can I see into this text what their lenses are seeing to make it relevant to them, and pull out nuggets that maybe in the past I didn't pull out before, or phrases or
Well,
ideas
I
that I
think
hadn't thought about before. I mean,
I
they're
think
just,
that's so.
yeah. I mean, you know, for you and me and people like us, reading comes naturally. You know, I've always said, give
Mhm.
an English teacher a book, and we don't need a TV, we don't need a radio. We're already there. If it's 25th century or if it's 6th century, our imaginations take us there. That's not true of this generation. I mean, they are willing to go there, but we've got to figure out with each text what's the key. What can we leverage inside that text that can resonate with their here and now? So relevance has become my watchword, and so yeah. Um,
You know, there are
yeah,
also some things that I think are operating that were already entrained before the pandemic, which have to do with kids' relationship with their devices.
right.
And Marianne Wolf is a whole lot of research, and among other researchers, on how skimming is becoming their students' default reading speed. You know, that thumb roll that you use on your phone to scan a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed. And honestly, skimming is an efficient and effective way to read a Twitter feed. It's a terrible way to read Hamlet. It's a terrible way to read any dense, serious text, fiction or informational. And what we need to work out, what the pandemic and virtual instruction challenge is, it's on the same device that students both have their social media accounts and the literature or the science essays that they're reading. So it's not the device that determines your attention or your focus, it's the text.
You're
And
right. You're right. And I one of the things that I do with them, because I like working even when I'm not in this space. So I have my iPad, I'm looking at it now, and I have the road not taken on it. And I get to show students how I annotate text. So I skim the Twitter, like you say, but for me, when I'm reading a text, if I'm working on, for example, just finished a project on Beloved, and as this is the hand reading, I have the ebook, and it is just as annotated and marked up as the book. So I think part of our task, particularly with this generation who has a buy-in, because they love, as you say, let's leverage what they love. Let's show them how they can actually read a text with the device that they like, even though it may be foreign to us. And I think that's important because we have to meet them halfway. You know, I've had a couple of colleagues who said, you hate the book. And I said, how can you say that? I mean, I've always loved books. I've been surrounded by books. I absolutely love the book, But if I'm 200 miles away from our home, I can't carry the library. I still have to work.
Oh, Jocelyn, I totally agree with you. We need to let go of this binary. I like books. I like my e. It's both. You know, again, I keep coming back to Marianne Wolf because we were in a meeting together yesterday. But you know, how she talks about how our students need to develop a biliterate reading brain.
Yes,
They
yes,
need to be efficient and effective, confident readers
yes.
in any of these mediums, whether it's print or screen. And like those of us who like books, just kind of get over it. Like move on. Let's keep and I do think, again, particularly at this moment when all of us are spending so much time on a screen, that physical books are ever the more important.
Yes.
But that said, it is not that easy. You know, here today, New York City schools just closed down. You know, went back to virtual learning. Chicago public schools still are still all remote. They're talking about maybe January. All of California is remote. How do you get physical books to
Right.
students who don't have books in their own? It is very, very difficult. So we got to use the digital. It's what we've got.
And in addition to that, we can also, because of the digital now, we can give students examples of primary sources from times past. You know, so I've been a champion of 19th century periodicals, particularly African-American periodicals. And some students have never even seen a periodical like that. So technology can allow for these students who are curious by nature to actually see what that looked like and ask questions like, well, who was reading this? Who knew? Or to see advertisements, or, you know, I mean, just the technology isn't the demon. It's about our trying to figure out how we, again, I keep using the word leverage. How can we leverage that technology to complement our teaching without sacrificing the books?
You know, there's actually some really positive research, which you don't hear a lot of in terms of teenagers and their mental health right now. Jean Twenge, who about 2 years ago wrote this article saying that phones were destroying this next generation. They were all getting depressed, all the rest. Kids like their phones better than their friends. Well, she gave that same survey in August. And what she found was quite remarkable. Now, granted, there are kids whose parents have lost their jobs, there are kids with food insecurity, but for the most part, students were handling the challenges of 2020 with resiliency. And why? 3 things. It's fascinating. They're getting more sleep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something we've been being told, but schools can never change their calendars because of sports teams. You know, the things that run this master schedule. 2, spending more time with their families,
Right.
siblings, having new roles within the family. And 3, to go back to the point that you were making, a more productive, a more, how can I say, a less passive use of technology.
Mm-hmm.
They were having to use it for the purpose of their own education, to create something for a class, instead of the more passive, just play Fortnite and, you know, endlessly kill time on social media. So I think that's a hopeful sign too, when you say meeting kids where they are, that it's not all bad things that have come out in terms of students as learners.
No, some of the panelists who were supposed to be on this session, we have virtual classes with them, and so virtual means just that, virtual. And so the chat box is not chatting with, oh, what did you do last night? It's, well, wait a minute, does that work? I'm not sure that I understand. Well, hey, how about this idea? So it's alive with their being engaged on a tool with which they are totally comfortable. You know, and again, what I like about Gen Z is that this is a tested little generation. You know, I mean, when you start having 6th graders say, I'm concerned about how to help my parents with my college tuition. The the sixth graders I was around when I was in sixth grade weren't even thinking about that. That was not an issue. We weren't
We were
thinking
thinking about combination.
yeah, yes. I mean, yeah, it wasn't about the money or the next meal. As you said, where's the next meal coming from? What about dad and the work, or mom and the work? They have so much and they're dealing with it. I mean, it's a very sober, serious generation. And I like them. I like them a lot. They stretch me way more than I've ever been stretched before. So you ready to move on? Question 2? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so describe how your student audience has or has not changed the way you enter, experience, and engage with texts.
Well, I mean, I too really am personally always looking for books to use with students. It's, as a teacher, every year I taught a new book, partly to challenge myself to keep thinking, and they weren't always, it wasn't always a success, when you're taking chances like that. But for me, thinking about what might work with students has always given purpose to my own reading. And one of the areas that I've been exploring more and more, because of the need for sharing complex, rich text with students and having this challenge of how do you get full-length works in their hands, is poetry. Because right. In a poem, you could share it, it's there. I really think it start every class with a poem. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to ask questions about it, but just share a poem, invite kids to go into the chat and pick a line they like, and then move on. Let go. You don't need to give a quiz about it. You don't need to assign points for it. But it could be that this kind of approach to teaching poetry could just might break down some of the barriers that right now students feel, or preconceived notions of poetry. I think a lot of kids think a poem is testing them, like that it's a trick, that it's a puzzle they need to solve, instead of seeing that the poet is actually reaching out and trying to tell you what they're thinking and feeling, and that your response is you're reaching back toward that poem to try to make that meaning. So that's the direction I'm taking. Thank God for the Poetry Foundation. I think their website is
I love their website. Yes,
in the world, and just a cornucopia of resources for anybody teaching virtually.
I think for me, because of my ethnicity and my gender and my historical Southern background, students, when I teach with them virtually now, because I can, as you know, get to more students around the country. So when I give them a piece of literature, then we're sharing and we're talking about it. It's amazing. They will read the text, but then they will turn it back on me and ask me my distance or relationship to that text, and then take it back to themselves. So that's been new for me, because that I've understood now that this generation's lens is a little different. When I approach a text, I'm looking for, as you said, I want to analyze, I want to experience it, I want to sort of tear it apart. They're looking for themselves, for identification, for relevance. And so that has been different for me. And sometimes it becomes uncomfortable because they ask uncomfortable questions. And I've had to learn that if I really believe in doing all of this work, then I have to answer the uncomfortable questions, and I have to be honest. And I sometimes tell them this, no one's ever asked me that question before. And okay, so let's just go there. Or something that I didn't see in the text that they, a middle schooler in one short story talked about the use of the characters saying, I saw his black face. And I was so proud of her. She stood up and she said, I have a question. And she came all the way into the computer and she leaned over and she said, you are going to tell them, meaning her classmates, that saying blackface is not good, right? And I thought, I missed that one. And I said, you are right. I said, however, this is a 19th century short story. And the mother is describing her son's face as a black face with a scar. So she's not being insulting to her son. And her name is Imani. Imani stood up and she said, "Oh, okay, but it's not good now." And I said, "You are absolutely right. That is not what we say today. It is not appropriate." And I said, "I thank you so much, because this shows you how language changes. Language is so movable. We make meanings in so many different ways, and words that meant one thing 1 year, centuries ago, months ago, means something else, or will mean something else 2 months from now. So it changes." So that was fourth grade. And I think that what I've learned from them is that because they are, as you say, so wedded to their technology, they can be anywhere, anytime in seconds and talking to anyone, anywhere, that as an English teacher, I've had to think more globally in terms of them. So I think about their lens, so that it has changed how I read a text now.
Because I think it's absolutely one of the best ways to demonstrate to students how evergreen classics are, is by putting them right up next to contemporary text. What I've learned over time, though, to be careful about is not to let the contemporary text always come second. Because as you privilege, the thing you put in first is, let's say, the cake. And then the rest is the frosting on the cake. If you're not careful, like I as a curriculum planner, you don't intend that to be the way, but you just have to be very intentional about making sure that that's not how it appears.
Right.
Particularly if you teach the central core text that's in your school 10th grade curriculum, and then say, and now you might want to read one of these. And there's a power differential there. So I think but we should be doing this all the time, for many reasons. Mm-hmm. How do you use the two, put the two together?
I'm looking for texts that you have recommended, in those wonderful sessions at NCTE, and that you and I just talk about as we share titles. And I find myself now always looking for images and primary sources. And thanks to you, it was the picture books that just really clinched it for me. And I thought that works. And so when I teach the more traditional or the curricular texts, I'm always trying to look for other texts that teachers have to teach and think of new entry points. Yes. Where teachers can scaffold onto them. You are the master at just reading everything that's coming out that's new. I'm sort of the plotter in the back saying, okay, so I've read that 50 times. Let me go back and reread it one more time to figure out what I didn't see the first time. So I like the idea of trying to take a well-known text like The Road Not Taken. And I mentioned that to you when we were planning this session, and rethinking it for students so what does that actually mean for students? As you say, taking a sentence out and actually letting the students think about what that means, and scaffolding then that onto another text that maybe they read 6 weeks ago, and showing students that texts are not insular. That you read a text and then you put it aside, it doesn't mean anything. You've tested it, you've written on it, so you're done with that. No. It's a tapestry of what authors try to do to tell the story of our humanness and of humankind, and how we experience things, so that just because, for example, like in Beloved, you have this family of slaves and freedmen and free people, and those who die, doesn't mean that that's just specific to Black people and to white slave owners. It's an idea with this generation of, do I actually own myself? Do I count? Do I have a voice? And then in my thoughts, I keep thinking of how students want to give their interpretations, and how I have to let go and say, okay, so what do you think that means? And it's exactly what you said before. It started with a poem. For me, it's starting it with a poem or maybe a passage from a particular piece or a line. As Baby Sugg says in The Clearing, I owns myself. Look at my hand. I own my hand. And I would just give it to students and say, what do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. What also what you're saying makes me think about contemporary writers, Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad and Ta-Nehisi
Yes.
is The Water Dancer. So these are contemporary interpretations and historical representations of the same time period that Toni Morrison was writing about in Beloved. And I want to tell you, Colson Whitehead's, so he won the Pulitzer for it.
Right.
And now I think I know about the Underground Railroad, and I promise you this is a true story, that as I'm reading his story, which actually talks about people getting on a railroad that's underground, I am saying to myself, ooh, I didn't know that really happened. I mean, he had me so caught up in his fictional world. And I understand magical realism, like I really intellectually, but in that world, I actually said to my husband, there really was a railroad that went underground. I mean, that is, to me, magic. That is what what brilliant writers do. And I think Ta-Nehisi Coates in The Water Dancer does a very similar thing in terms of bringing magic into a historical fiction.
And Morrison said, and when she was being interviewed several times over about this novel, she said, I don't want readers to see the image or to see the thing. I want them to feel. I want them to feel this moment. And she totally changed the way, as students have changed the way I read in text, she's changed the way I analyze authors. And as Giovanni used to say, there are good authors, great authors, monumental authors. And to me, the monumental ones are the ones that make me feel that I can identify with them, even though I'm an African-American woman from the South, educated in the South by way of a little bit of trip to England and all of back. But at heart, I'm that little girl in Houston, Texas, with my parents and and thinking, how does that work? How did that apply to my East Texas background? Or does it apply? And that's what I'm hearing from students. I mean, they actually take these, as you say, like you felt like you were on the Underground Railroad. These students want to know, well, wait a minute, what does, is the South still racist? I mean, those are some of the questions that I get. Or have you lost someone close to you, like in Jacqueline Woodson's Another Brooklyn? So they are thinking, and sometimes I have to tell teachers, when students ask those questions, they really are processing. They may not be saying, here's a metaphor, that's a simile, but they are processing and thinking. And isn't that what we want?
Exactly. And learning. Like most of the history I know, I learned from novels. I mean, what Ta-Nehisi Coates teaches about the politics of the Underground Railroad is just stunning. And I think that too is an under-recognized value of reading fiction. That,
right.
Many people who say, I don't know why you're also hung up on fiction. Well, it's story that helps you remember detail, that right. it imprints. I'm not really one for brain imaging stuff, but people show really great slides of what happens to your brain when you're reading a story. And it's kind of like Las Vegas, and I think that's, again, for people who want to discount literature, they're missing how it lays the ground for actually understanding culture, history, geography, all kinds of other things.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I really, there were some students at last year's conference, and Cornelius Minor and I, after the session, we invited students to come back and we just talked with them and their teachers. And some of the students said, we're so tired of reading the Scarlet Letter. Why do we have to read that? And I said, did you ever think that, because they said, we want to read The Hate U Give. And I said, well, That works, because have you thought that those two books are actually quite similar? And they said, similar. And I said, you got to be kidding me. You have these strong women who are young women who are pushing back. And then they started saying, well, we hadn't thought about it that way. So, again, I think sometimes we see literature too often as isolated entities. The poem is isolated from the short story, which is isolated from the novel, and nothing touches, nothing transfers. You can't, if you teach Julius Caesar, then I can't teach it at another grade level, because after all, it's been taught already. Well, wait a minute. As we read books over and over and over again. So why can't we interweave and scaffold on to show students the trajectory?
What you're saying leads right into the fourth question about,
that's right,
text relevant to students' lives. And it makes me think part of the problem are some of the things we've asked kids to do with texts that are highly artificial.
Yes.
Keeping reading logs, even annotating. Now, I'm not saying annotating a text is a bad thing, but when the goal is a perfectly annotated text, rather than using a pencil to help me attend to what I'm reading, because that's, for me, a technique for focus. We just lose, we move away from the real reason to read. Scholastic every year does a survey of children's attitudes toward reading, and their last survey, they called it Decline by 9, because up till 9 years old, students love to read. And then suddenly you see this plunging. And then you've got this year's 12th grade NAEP scores that just came out. And in the contextual variables, that 26% of students reported never reading a book outside of school. And 50% said, well, only maybe once or twice a year. Now, in my opinion, when a kid checks, I read a book once or twice a year, he just doesn't want to check that last box that he never read. This is horrific. What is school doing that's actually destroying students' desire to read instead of engendering it?
I think part of it is that the way we ourselves, and not just we older teachers, but I think the way we're trained in courses. I think that we seek out answers. We want the specific themes. We want this. Reading is about exploration and discovery of that time period, discovery of those people, experiencing those challenges, and along the way, sometimes seeing bits and glimpses of myself and questioning. And I think with this generation, especially, we have to be open to their voices and their perspectives. Nothing is wrong. I mean, if the goal is to get them to read and to interact, then we have to free up their voices. We can't just say, you will read this and you will say exactly what I'm telling you you're going to read.
And we need to give them choice.
That's right. Give them choice.
One of the just features of developmentally appropriate behavior for teenagers, if I say do this, they want to do the opposite.
That's right.
It's how kids are. But if I say, here are 5 books, any one you want, and let me just tell you about them a little bit, and suddenly even that much choice makes a difference in terms of students' buy-in and engagement with the process. They've had some agency in their own.
That's right.
And that's I shouldn't shake my finger. I'm sorry.
No.
But that's one of the things that I think we've done wrong. Like we're busy kind of showing off what we know about literature.
Yes.
And because we think that's what we're getting paid to do, instead of creating opportunities for students to learn for themselves.
And let it get messy.
Oh, yeah.
Let it get messy and let them do projects with it. Let them, again, if they completely disagree, let them disagree. And if they ask you questions that you don't know, say, I don't know that. I haven't thought about that before. Let's make a project out of that and think about what does that mean? Or how do we figure out, we've got to make sure that the whole concept, at least in my mind, literacy means in our classrooms, enabling these young people through teaching fiction, new and old, to think, to experience, to use that fiction as a resource as they move forward to learn how to analyze, to inquire, to just be able to master not literary texts, but all kinds of texts.
Yeah. And you know, just what you've said made me think kids do know how to analyze, critique. I mean,
They do it every day.
Movie. Movies that are beyond me, and they are incredibly good at analysis and critique. It's how we set up the classroom, and assessment and quizzes and multiple choice questions, true and false questions about a literary text, identify what character said this. All of that needs to be excised, I think,
Yes.
from the English curriculum, and really make it much more about endless book clubs, but like serious book clubs, not an excuse to just talk about, oh, this reminds me of X Baba, and we're off talking about my life, but really digging into the text together, talking about passages that puzzled us, that disturbed us. And if we did that, I really think that you'd see reading comprehension begin to soar in ways.
I agree.
All the skill and drill and other things.
I think we should. The other thing I would want excised is taking your baggage into the classroom as teachers. Leave it at the door. I don't care what happened.
Talk more about what you mean when you say that.
I say that because sometimes teachers will not only take what they think are the right themes or the right figurative forms or whatever, but if they're uncomfortable with the text, for example, if they're uncomfortable with the ethnicity or the words in a text, they shy away. Students can smell fear. Mm. So if you're fearful, tell them you're uncomfortable. Just tell them and understand. Don't look at your sole African-American student or your sole Latino student or Asian and say, you understand, don't you? No. How are they supposed to understand? They don't represent the entirety of their culture. Mm-hmm. And the idea that a culture moves monolithically is specious at the very beginning. So I think as teachers, as English teachers, we need to think about what do we take into the classroom that colors or could color a student's learning, that could actually shut it down or slow it down. Is it a way you disagree with them? Is it a way that you want to try and push your own political notions on them or your social notions? All of that should not be there. And, I've had folks who say, well, no, you just can't do that. You have to take, you can't divest yourself of your feelings. Sure you can. When I walk into a classroom, whether it's virtual or not, I'm a teacher. I'm not Jocelyn from the South. I'm not Jocelyn with, a rhetorician and stuff. I'm a teacher and I'm listening to my students. And more importantly, I want to be a learner with them. I want to learn something with them that I didn't know before. And that means I have to divest myself of what I think I know. So I'm sort of a guide. I listen and we talk. And it's exactly what you said. But it's really important, particularly with this generation, because they understand and construct difference differently. They embrace it. They like it. They don't understand how we codify so much. Mm-hmm. And it's an anathema to them. And you can't, again, one of the barriers of getting students to read, if they figure out that you have these barriers, they're not going to want to read. At one of
another barrier, I think, challenge. I was just talking with teachers yesterday about, very fearful of parents, what parents will say about particular book choices that they bring in. And it seems to me it's particularly books by and about LGBTQ mm-hmm. characters and themes and authors that, right. That are teachers are afraid to bring these stories into their classrooms in certain communities. and it makes me think how that shows how important it is that we do.
Exactly.
The very fact that it's dangerous, let's say, the teacher needs to tread carefully in terms of being articulate about why you've chosen this book, and also always providing alternatives to students whose parents object. But that's part of being a professional teacher, is having
And,
the words to defend your curricular choices.
and we've always done this. I mean, literature by its very nature is controversial.
That's right.
It has always been controversial. And parents have always been concerned about our mucking about in their children's minds. So, again, I agree with you. If you're that nervous about it, and I've said to teachers, I've said two things. If you're that nervous about it, don't teach the text. If you're that fearful of it, please quit. Because we need people who are not fearful, because you're hurting the rest of us.
Jocelyn, if people knew what the nurse was saying in Romeo and Juliet, they wouldn't let their ninth graders read it for a minute.
Jeffrey and the nun, right? Little Jeffrey talking about the nun. Yes.
But,
yes. Or the sex scenes. I mean, prime example, when I'm reading aloud to students, and with Morrison, it's still in some fiction, the hardest word for me to say is nigger. And I prime my head so that I can say what I need to say, so that the students then can come back and say, well, how do you feel about that? Do you use racial slurs? No, I don't. And if they see Giovanni, then I've actually had the questions, well, when you get angry, no, we don't. That's not what happens. So, I mean, this is where their heads, so they're reading and they're processing, and they're asking relevant terms, taking that text up and out of its period to right now.
That's right.
And it's just so important.
Jocelyn, I think we've just kind of solved the problems of the world here.
Think, forget the periodontal surgery. I'm having so much fun working with you. This is great. I missed the panel, but this has been fun. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of it. And here's to more good books.
Here's to more good books and more collaborations with the three of us.
Sounds wonderful.